there certainly are some challenges. So we wanted to give you an update of some of the things that we're working on, but just as much to hear some feedback from you. I also acknowledge tonight John's going to be speaking, and I believe my other colleague is on here, our other colleague, Leanne Rood. Leanne's actually the Deputy Shadow Minister for Agriculture and Agri-Food, and she with John is, they are two of our members on the Agricultural Committee that just came back and started sitting virtually last week. So we appreciate them joining us to hear from our part of the country of everything going on. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Michael Barrett, my colleague to the west, just to give an introduction, a couple of opening comments, and we'll go from there. Michael.
Well, thanks very much, Eric. I appreciate you helping to arrange this evening, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. See some familiar names and faces that have joined the call from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes. It is a pleasure to join you. It is a unique way, but certainly, like many of you, I long for the more traditional ways that we'd be getting to see each other over the coming weeks and months. Planning for the local fairs and the like. So I've heard from many of you, and my office has heard from many of you about the different challenges that you're facing, whether it's a lack of access to international markets and the rising cost of doing business, that you need meaningful support. You don't need added debt. You are recovering from a tough 2019, and you needed a good 2020 to remain viable. And so the government support that you're counting on needs to come to fruition, and you need those supports because Canadians are of course counting on you. In our community, we've heard from everyone from horse breeding and riding facilities facing drastic loss in income. Of course, our tourism industry that supports the restaurants in our community. They're left shuttered right now. Our beef producers, they're in a very difficult position, losing tens of thousands of dollars on individual contracts. I don't want to detail all of the challenges that you're facing. What I'd like to do is take the opportunity this evening to hear a little more about the local specific issues. We're going to hear from, as Eric said, John Barlow and Leanne Rood, as well as two of my colleagues here in Eastern Ontario, Jamie and Eric. So thanks very much for taking the time to join us this evening. I'm looking forward to the feedback that you have to provide. My staff's on the call as well, taking diligent notes so that I can listen attentively. They're going to write furiously. If there are any questions that aren't addressed on the call today, please do send my office an email, and we'll get back to you. We'll get back to you right away with a response. So again, thanks very much for joining us this evening, and looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks. We'll pass over to Jamie Schmale, the Member of Parliament for Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes Brock, a beautiful part of our province. Jamie.
Thank you, Eric. And yes, it is paradise in Haliburton-Kawartha Lakes Brock, and this is the place to be. I appreciate you putting this on, and all of you for joining us here tonight. I know it is a busy time for each and every one of you, and so it is appreciated. My area, like Michael's, like Eric's, like Leanne's, and John Barlow, it's agriculture focus. It's number one for the economy, and I know coming off 2019, it was a bad year for a lot of sectors. You don't have to go through very far to find someone that was hurt through 2019 and even parts of 2018 as well. But we're here to listen. We're here to take notes and see how we can come back to the government with a plan to improve the package that was announced a few days ago. For the feedback I'm getting, it's not nearly enough considering money doled out to different sectors. So we're here to take your feedback, listen, and fight for each and every one of you. So thank you very much. I'll stop talking because I want to get to questions and answers. So take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. For myself, as a member here, I just wanted to bring up a couple of other agriculture-related but rural issues that I know we've been hearing about as well. It would encourage your questions on it. My assistant Adrian is on here, and I will just say if you would like to ask a question and haven't had a chance to yet, please do email it to my office, and we can get it into the queue here for John to answer. The email being eric.duncan, D-U-N-C-A-N, @parle.gc.ca. And you can also do the raise your hand feature if you wanted to ask a question. You just look along the bottom part of your bar of the screen. You'll see the participants button. And then from there, you'll see raise hand, and we'll get to questions at the end. If you're calling from a landline, you can hit *9. That will give us the cue that you want to say a few words or ask a question, and we can unmute you whenever you're called upon. So that's just a technical note. From some rural aspects of rural issues, the firearms ban that was announced by the government last Friday, that has certainly taken a lot of time, increased time, and a lot of frustration from our residents. I do have a question that I've seen come in on that, and we'll elaborate on that further. The other thing that I want to mention is internet connectivity. And I know there's not a lot of positives coming out of what's happening right now, but I think over the last 8-9 weeks, we have seen momentum build for knowing that we need to have better quality of internet in rural Eastern Ontario and frankly, all of rural Canada. Some of my colleagues, Michelle Rempel, who is our critic for industry that looks after broadband and internet, we are putting a big push on as a Conservative Party to do a massive investment in internet and broadband services in rural communities with the goal of shovels in the ground and making a significant improvement by next year. And again, I think it's as people work remotely, people are meeting by Zoom, they are seeing how there's certainly a gap between rural and urban rather, and how we can, I got a brewery that has the mixed name in my writing, if you can tell. And so we know we need to bridge that gap, and we need to address that. So I would encourage you, again, in the associations, I'm looking here and see Federation of Agriculture, Soil and Crop, I see our Milk Marketing Board, some of our thing from my riding, is please contribute to that consultation. We'll send you the information. And I know from an agriculture, there's a lot of opportunity when we have good internet in our equipment and the technology advancements. So with that, I will pass it over to John, who is, again, our shadow minister at the federal level, a member of the Agriculture and Agri-Food Committee in Ottawa, to give us an update of what they've been working on and some of the issues that he's been addressing in the last couple of weeks.
Well, thanks very much, Eric, and Amy and Michael, Leanne, for inviting me here to be a part of this today, and certainly to meet many of you here this evening. As you can tell, I've got a bit of Zoom voice, a lot of these things, that so I am losing my voice a bit. So I'll talk for about 10 or 5 minutes, kind of give you a bit of a rundown on what's going on right now, but to save as much time as I can for questions is certainly the most important thing we can do right now is listen to your feedback and your insight on what U.S. producers, processors, business owners are certainly facing going through this. As Eric said, the Agriculture Committee is back up and running, and we are focused solely on COVID-19. I don't think there's any question that the frustration level and anxiety level is at unprecedented proportions when it comes to our agriculture sector. And I just want to back up a little bit and kind of set the table for what we're facing right now. I come also from a very rural riding, grew up in High River, Alberta, the heart of cattle country, the southwest corner of the province. So I understand certainly what you're going through right now as well. But you kind of have to look back over the last few years, and agriculture was doing for the most part quite well going into 2015. But then we've had a number of issues which have culminated in what has been a very difficult year. One of the worst harvests we've had in decades. Then a CN strike, illegal blockades, carbon taxes, all of these things have just piled on one after another. And we've seen the results of that when Stats Canada came out with its report earlier this year that showed farm revenue is down 45% in 2018, which is an unprecedented drop for Canadian agriculture. So you saw, as I'm speaking to the converted here on this call, certainly, that in many aspects or many sectors of agriculture, you were in rocky financial footing coming into this, and then you get a pandemic. So what we were asking, or what all of us have been asking for, is a an assistance package designed specifically for the unique financial and business structure that is around agriculture, agri-food, processing, no matter what sector you are in. Obviously, we have not seen that. And I think with the report from Dr. Sylvain Charlebois that came out about 10 days ago that said we are in a very real risk of losing 15% of our farms. That's 30,000 farm families that are on the precipice of going bankrupt if the federal government does not offer some tangible assistance to the agriculture sector. This is exceedingly frustrating when every single day we have the Prime Minister or the Agriculture Minister coming forward and saying, we understand how essential agriculture is, we've got your back, we're there for you. But I'm a firm believer that actions speak much louder than words, and we just haven't seen that. The agriculture assistance package that was announced last week is woefully short of being adequate. And we'll just kind of run down a couple of the aspects of that program. It's $250 million for the entire agriculture sector. And, let's put that in perspective. More than $3 billion or close to $3 billion was announced for seniors today, $9 billion for students, and not last Monday, $850 million for the World Health Organization to fight COVID-19. And then a fraction of that to an entire industry, which is an integral part of our economy. Even when you look at just food processing alone, which is our largest manufacturing center in the country, bar none. So you can see where our frustration comes with this. And as part of that assistance package that was announced of the $250 million, $125 million of that was earmarked for a program called Agri-Recovery, which I know many of you are probably familiar with, but many have probably never accessed. This is being touted as this unprecedented, extraordinary measure to assist agriculture in this time of need. I want to be really clear. This is not new money. This is not a new program. There's $125 million in agri-recovery every single year. So this is nothing new. This is just a re-announcement of an existing program that we still don't have any details on how you can access it, who is going to be eligible, when that money will start to flow, and which sectors are going to be able to benefit from those funds. Part of that 125 million is also earmarked specifically the other 125 million is earmarked $50 million for a set-aside program for cattle and $50 million for pork. Those of you who are in the cattle industry, you'll know that the $50 million is already gone. It's been used. I have Feedlot Alley in the southern part of my riding. One feedlot was probably $2.5 million in feed in 1 month, and that's just one operator. So that goes to show you where we're at overall. So it really goes to show you how these programs have fallen short. And now we're hearing from our grains and oilseeds producers that they're going to be cutting back on what they're planting. And I guess the message we're trying to get across here is, does the government understand, or does the Prime Minister Trudeau understand the implications or the very real risk to our food security that it is at the precipice right now? If we lose 30,000 farm families, or we have farmers planting 25% less than capacity, our processing plants now are processing about 50% of their capacity. And because of COVID-19, the max they'll get to is maybe 85%. The implications on our food security and even the price of groceries on the shelves is going to be very profound in the fall. That is why we're pushing so hard. And I want to just conclude with this before I get to questions. And I know I'm always cognizant of being, depressing everyone, but I know you're all very familiar with what I'm talking about this evening. But I just want to say this as part of this is, I think there are incredible opportunities for Canadian agriculture coming out of COVID-19. When you see countries like Russia, Kazakhstan, Vietnam, Singapore closing their borders, meaning no exports, they want to make sure that their residents are fed first. Of course, that is a huge priority for us as well. But that means there are going to be big gaps and big voids in global trading markets that Canadian producers can take advantage of. But for us to be able to do that, we have to ensure that you have the tools to take advantage of those markets, but also ensure that you are not handcuffed coming through this and able to be clicking on all cylinders coming into next fall. But there is no question that there's not a sector in agriculture that has not been impacted significantly in a negative way by what has transpired. And to have the Minister of Agriculture, the level of neglect that they have shown for our agriculture and farm families is really disconcerting. And I'll just finish with these 2 points. We also heard today that the Agriculture Minister has canceled all studies and field studies for the foreseeable future. This is $22 million that barley and wheat growers have raised themselves to do this very important work. So during a pandemic, when this research is critical, it's interesting that they have cut off, for all intents and purposes, to use one of their lines, muzzled Canadian scientists. And the second part of that too is the Prime Minister last week said Canadian farmers are better off with a carbon tax. This is financially benefiting Canadian producers. But when we asked through an order paper question what the impact of the carbon tax is on agriculture, what does the data show? And we were told by the Department of Agriculture that information is secret. So when we have a government that says we are science-based, we are open and transparent, that won't even publish the data that shows the impact the carbon tax has on Canadian farmers is really disingenuous. And for the Prime Minister to come out and say that you are benefiting financially from a carbon tax during a financial crisis, I find to be quite ridiculous. But that is a quick rundown of where we are right now. We'll be going through the committee process. I know some of you are following that, and it is good to see some of the stakeholder groups like the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. The Ontario grain growers launched their campaign today calling out the Liberal government, which is fantastic to see. So it's good that all of you are being vocal and having your voices heard, and all of us on this call as MPs will be there to augment your voices. So I'm looking forward to your questions, and thanks very much.
Thank you, John. And to mention again there that we're lucky to have 2 members here. Leanne Rood is the Deputy Shadow Minister, and she's also on the Agricultural Committee, and I see that she's listening in here. And as we go through the questions, Leanne, feel free to hop in on anything that you'd like to. And I also want to acknowledge my provincial colleague, Jim McDonnell, for Stormont-Dundas-South. We're very lucky to have Ernie Hardeman, Ontario's Minister of Agriculture, join our local Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry Ag virtual town hall a couple weeks ago. We've expanded it a little bit bigger now, but I appreciate Jimmy joining us. I know he's taking feedback back to the provincial government, and if any provincial questions of a nature come up here tonight, he can certainly try to address them and make another thing I wanted to mention before we begin, I was going to do this at the end, but I just thought maybe to mention it now. Many people in my riding, Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry, would be aware of the tragic farm accident that had happened just south of Chesterville last week. We had a 30-year-old young man, Mike Van Gunten, of a wonderful farm family. Unfortunately, he lost his life in a tragic accident last Friday morning. And I know that's sent ripples through our rural community, through our farming community, and our thoughts are with them, the Van Gunten family and the Thurler family. I know them quite well. They're fantastic people, hardworking people, and great ambassadors of agriculture. So I know many in the call would know the family, and just that we're thinking of Mike's family and mourning that loss. When somebody in farming community is impacted, everybody feels it, and I know this is certainly the same way. So with that, we'll go to some questions here. We have a few in, and I'll just remind you again, if you'd like to ask a question, if you wanted to use the participants label at the bottom, you just click on the button, and there's a raise your hand feature to bring you into the queue. And if you're calling in from a landline, I believe we've got some. I know Duncan Ferguson had sent some questions in, and I believe he's calling in from the tractor tonight. So I believe that's where a lot of people are in tonight. But *9 on your phone, if you're calling in from a landline or phone, will get you in the queue so we can unmute you to get your question. John, we'll start with the first question here we just have about the dairy bill coming to Parliament Hill tomorrow. Can you give a background about what that bill is doing and your thoughts on supply management and dairy, where this is going lately?
Sure, thanks. Of course, a guy from Alberta gets the first supply management question. So, yeah, the bill is really quite simple. It is increasing the line of credit for the Dairy Commission to $500 million. And what that basically, for all intents and purposes, does is it allows the Dairy Commission to buy any surplus milk producers have on hand, and then they will hang on to it and then sell it back to the processors when when the processors of the market can handle it. But really, it's unlikely that the dairy processors will access these dollars. It is 2 weeks too late. It would have been more beneficial, I guess, when they were dumping milk, but now they have, kind of steadied the ship, so to speak. So this is, again, $200 million to the Dairy Commission. It is a loan. It is not a grant. And I guess it does bring up the fact that, one sector is getting a proportionate amount of assistance over some other parts of the agriculture sector. But really, our argument is agriculture as a whole needs to stand together on these issues and show that it is being overlooked as an industry, not try and pick one sector out over another.
Thank you. The next question, I see on here Martin Lang. He was referenced. Martin's a councillor in my constituency and a well-regarded farmer. I know Martin's involved with the Glengarry Federation of Agriculture. And Duncan Ferguson submitted this question from Williamstown on behalf of, as a director of the Glengarry Federation of Agriculture, about fully funding risk management programs. A note that he has here is that an official that he was speaking to from Farm Credit Canada has indicated that the default rates on crop input loans in the 2019 crop season have doubled from the previous year. At minimum, the federal government needs to acknowledge the issues being faced by farmers across the country and fully fund our risk management programs. Agriculture can be a strategic partner in restarting the economy in a COVID-19 age, but overlooking the industry will have a dramatic and immediate detrimental impacts. Any comments, John, or work that the committee's talked about on risk management programs?
Yeah, great question. And it's an issue that hasn't been brought up a lot, is those changes on the credit limits for Farm Credit Canada, when those were changed in 2019. So when the government talks about, first off on the Farm Credit Canada, they said, well, they've announced $5 billion to assist Farm Credit Canada. Again, that is old money. That is money that was already in place. So that, again, that's not a new program. And in fact, it's actually more difficult for producers to access, because there are now farmers that would have qualified for Farm Credit Canada assistance. But when that change was made by the Liberals in 2019, there are farmers out there with very good credit ratings that are no longer eligible or don't meet the criteria on Farm Credit Canada. So Farm Credit Canada is only accessed by about 25% of producers. So that means 75% of Canadian agriculture and farm families are not even eligible for Farm Credit Canada assistance. So that's one. On the business risk management, agri-stability is the one that's talked most often. But agri-stability was never designed to deal with a pandemic. In many cases, the subscription rate for agri-stability is around 35%. So very few producers find any benefit from it for a variety of reasons. But what we need now is we need a cash injection immediately. So in many cases, agri-stability, you would not see a payment for months, in some cases more than a year down the road. So it's not really designed well for the pandemic. Agri-Invest is something that I think more producers would benefit from. And I think that is an area we can put more of our focus on. But I think, again, there is some struggles with that, in that anything we want to do on those business risk management programs, we need the buy-in from the provinces. Provinces cover 40% of that, the federal government 60%. And the provinces are in a very difficult financial situation right now, as Jim can certainly attest to. And I know Ontario and Alberta have stepped up in some ways to do some top-ups in some of these various programs. Now, not to say that the federal government couldn't step up and just cover the difference to get the reference margin back to 85% on agri-stability, for example, but they have not chosen to do that.
All right, thank you. The next question comes from a feed and seed owner and operator manager of a local business that talks about the top-up for essential workers. It was recently announced, and I believe the clip was in Real Agriculture, it was an article in Real Agriculture, that announced that the top-up wage program could apply to farm and food industry workers, according to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Prime Minister Trudeau announced the $3 billion in funding to increase the wages of low-income essential workers. It was about a week or two ago. And a press release from the Prime Minister's office says that provinces and territories have confirmed or are in the process of confirming plans to cost share the wage top-up for essential workers. According to the PMO, each province or territory will determine which workers will be eligible for support and how much support they will receive. The ministers alluded that agriculture being deemed essential has been deemed essential by all provinces, thus making wage earners eligible for a portion of the $3 billion. And just wondering, John, if you had any thoughts on that, or if there's any clarity on this yet. I know we had a news release actually that said that you and the committee members were involved in about deeming agriculture an essential service during this, but anything on the wage aspect?
Yeah, I'll answer the 2 points of that. We were pushing extremely hard very early on for the federal government to make agriculture and agri-food an essential service. They went part of the way. They made it. They did not make it mandatory. They said this is by choice by the provinces. So the provinces do have jurisdiction in many of these areas, but when it comes to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, for example, that is federal jurisdiction, and they have not made that a mandatory essential service. So that they have fallen short in some of those areas, which does impact our processing plants, for example. But in terms of frontline workers, we have no details on who will be eligible, when will that money be rolled out. So I would like to give you a better answer on that, but we just don't have details. And maybe Jim on from the provincial side would have some more details on that, but we don't have anything on the federal side yet.
Jim?
We just have, just when it comes to the health workers so far, and people that are involved with frontline healthcare, like the long-term care homes, hospitals. We started that sometime, even I think before the federal government opened up there. So we haven't seen just a lot of what that program is and what the funding is just yet.
Noted, but and it's one of those things too, is the details, the high level announcements made, and John was alluding to that, a high level announcements made, details to come, and it can create some confusion as we go along. One thing, and Michael and Jamie and even John may want to chip in on this, one of the things I want to mention is about the Canada Summer Jobs and the youth benefit of $1,250. I know this is something that many of us have raised in the House of Commons in our different committees. There's $9 billion for students and the $1,250 per month. I think it's important to look after young people that would normally be going into work this summer. One of the big challenges, two things, one specifically pertaining to agriculture, is I'm hearing from a lot of businesses that are interested in hiring a student, but there's no funding or no wage there. And we're not seeing a subsidy type program to encourage youth employment as opposed to students collecting the $1,250 a month. Some see, I consider myself a younger person, but people say it's an attack on young people that you're saying that they don't want to work. And I've spoke to two businesses now, actually. One today had a great conference call that has a couple locations in my riding where they would normally hire a couple of dozen young people. It wasn't specific to agriculture, but the one business had 85 out of 100 students that worked for them last year. The other had about 2 dozen. And both of them said between 80 to 90% of the students said they weren't interested in working this summer. The benefit was offered and they're planning on using that for the summer. So there actually is a big crunch. And I've heard from quite a few, Adrian in my office was looking after the Canada Summer Jobs. A lot of farms and agricultural businesses want to hire somebody, but are not getting applications, or not getting any funds to help support their hiring efforts. So I know some of my colleagues are pushing to have some sort of specific wage program to help businesses, whether it be agriculture, whatever it may be, to hire young people and do a bit of a wage subsidy type thing for them. So that's something we're trying to address. And I know agriculture can certainly use the help likely this year in some of our agritourism businesses that way. I'm not sure, John, if you had any comments, or Michael or Jamie to chip in on that by all means.
Yeah, Eric, for sure. And that, I'd say it's probably 3 weeks ago now that we did put forward a proposal to expand the Canada Summer Jobs Program and have a specific part of that, a new budget specifically to match Canadian agriculture with youth who are going to be out of work this summer. They would be, in many cases, those traditional summer jobs like restaurants, bars, campgrounds, those types of things aren't going to be there. So we have a talent pool of labor that is going to be looking for work. And obviously in agriculture, we know is one area in our economy that is desperate for workers. So why not match these things together? It would be a win-win. You would have young Canadians who would maybe discover new career opportunities in agriculture, Certainly there is a sophisticated technology there in robotics, GPS, precision agriculture, and also our producers would be accessing an untapped labor pool in many ways. So, and the benefit of that is the funds would, rather than the $1,250 going to the youth, it would be funneled through the business owner and the producer, or the agribusiness, or the farmer. So that those dollars would be working their way through the economy. We had great feedback from all stakeholders for this program, but unfortunately the Liberals have yet to follow through on that. And I don't know if any of my colleagues wanted to chime in on that, but I think it would have been a perfect solution to what is a problem for us right now.
Agreed, and I still think that it can be in terms of a wage subsidy, something. There is some infrastructure there through the Canada Summer Jobs or the emergency wage subsidy. The infrastructure is there for businesses to be able to claim something. Michael, I believe you had a comment perhaps, and then a question for John.
Yep. So from one of my constituents with respect to moving product. So whether it's ports or the interprovincial borders, the Canada-U.S. border, just what have we heard from officials at the Ag Committee with respect to getting product moving, knowing that for some sectors inventory is getting low, and in other sectors inventory is getting backed up.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Nothing specific have we discussed that at committee as of yet, but I think this has highlighted, going through this, some real gaps in our supply chain, and that's, we certainly saw that before even COVID-19, where Canada now has an unreliable infrastructure system when it comes to moving our products and commodities from one area to the next, and that certainly came up with the CN strike in the fall and the illegal blockades this winter. And what the result of that has been is many of even our most trusted trading partners do not see Canada as a reliable source for some of those commodities, because we are not meeting our responsibilities. We're not meeting the contracts that grain terminals have signed, for example. So they are going elsewhere. And it's very difficult once you find a new place to shop to come back to your previous supplier. So I think this highlights a couple of different things. This highlights the need for a true Canadian free trade agreement, where we do not have these provincial non-trade tariff, trade barriers within our own country, and certainly take a look at our processing capacity and value added here at home.
Thanks for that, John. We've got a hand raised here, and it comes from somebody calling in, the last four numbers being 9114.
Yep, I can hear you. Hey, Eric, it's Duncan Ferguson calling in. Just wanted to thank you for submitting my comments or bringing my comments forward here earlier. And I actually did have a follow-up question. I'm glad that the minister brought up the topic of trade barriers and barriers to trade. My question revolves around non-tariff barriers to trade, specifically with the European Union. My question is, what's being done at the federal level to address the non-EU approved corn hybrid for export to the EU?
Thanks, Duncan. John?
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. I appreciate you calling in while you're seeding. I think that's what Eric said you were doing, and I know many of my constituents are doing the same thing. Well, they were, but now it's snowing in Alberta, so maybe not today. But you bring up a great point. We were so proud of negotiating the CETA and the TPP when we were still in government, and to see that finally cross the finish line. I think we were all expecting some better things from CETA specifically, where now we've seen these non-tariff trade barriers thrown up, whether that's cattle carcass washing, glyphosate wheat in Italy, and all these types of things. So I think there's two things that we need to do. Now, to answer your question, I don't think there's a whole heck of a lot happening with the Liberal government right now in terms of trying to reopen that. But we really want to ensure that we have CFIA and Ag Canada staff on the ground in our consulates and in our embassies in Europe. They are so integral to ensuring that we quell some of the misinformation that is out there. when it comes to, whether that's the hybrid corn or hybrid canola, some of these things these new varieties that we're developing here in Canada. So that is really important. And we have seen the budget decline for Ag Canada staff and CFIA staff and food integrity across the globe and in Canada. So I think that's the first thing. We have to ensure that we have those people on the ground in those consulates, in those embassies, having those conversations. And the second thing I think is it comes to, we really overlook the importance of foreign affairs. And right now, under Prime Minister Harper, we were well respected around the world. And I think we have lost a lot of that. And we have seen that with more than $5 billion, with a B, more than $5 billion in lost foreign markets for our agricultural commodities. That's soybeans and canola to China, that's peas and pulses to India, that's wheat to Saudi Arabia, barley to Vietnam, and again, wheat to Italy. Markets that we used to have that we have now lost. And it's not because of quality. That is not the problem at all. It is because of political policy and political foreign affairs blunders. And that is really difficult for you as producers when there's so many variables that are out of your control. One that you think you should have on side with you is a government that is championing your products and your stewardship and conservation around the world. And that's just not happening right now. So we need that global leadership as a second part of that.
Thanks, John. We got another question in by email. I mentioned earlier talking about firearms, and I imagine this is something Jamie, Michael, and I, and John are all going to want to, and Leanne may have some to add from her neck of the woods in southwestern Ontario about the firearms announcement from the government. And just a summary of the concern is that it's going after law-abiding citizens. Any idea of how much it's going to cost and how this is going to roll out is basically the question that way. So John, we'll start with you. I know this is something that I've talked to a lot of constituents about, and I know a lot of farmers would be interested in this. Just get your thoughts from rural Alberta.
Well, this is something that hits, I'm not going to answer very long. I'm going to let my colleagues take a chance, but many of you may remember the 2013 floods in southern Alberta in High River, my hometown. We had a gun grab where the RCMP came in and broke into 1,600 homes and stole all their firearms. Basically, they stole it. So the people in my riding are livid with this because they look this as another long gun registry, another gun grab. And I think in my last, I'll let the others comment, my problem with this is the process, they circumnavigated our democracy. But the second part is they are out and out lying to Canadians that this is somehow going to be a deterrent for violent crime. This does nothing to address violent crime and the illegal smuggling of firearms into Canada. This is clearly an attack on law-abiding firearms owners and will have zero impact on crime.
Jamie, did you want to chip in?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I agree with John. I think whether or not you agree with it, the process is something that should really scare anyone in Canada as to the fact that they basically circumvented Parliament and made 1,500 firearms and other items illegal with the stroke of a pen. So that should put the fear into everyone. But we all know if we actually want to solve the problem of gun violence, we have to stop the illegal smuggling of firearms across the Canada-US border. We actually have to deal with the real problem, which is the gang problem, and include that in tougher sentences for those using a firearm in the proceed of a crime. So this is just going to give people a false sense of security. This is not going to stop the shootings, the gang shootings in Toronto and Edmonton and Vancouver. This is just going to go after law-abiding citizens, and this is again something that even the confusion over whether or not a 12-gauge shotgun is legal or illegal with the Canada Border Services, with the RCMP. This is ongoing. So it just shows you how it was rolled out, and the thought process did not go far enough to even include some of the finer details of this firearms grab.
Thank you. Michael.
And I think that that Jamie and John said it very well, and so I won't go much farther except to say that like you guys, I've heard a ton of feedback from folks who just don't understand how they're there to become criminals overnight after following all of the rules. And getting that license and legally acquiring their gun, and always, enjoying their sport, hunting in a safe and legal way. And suddenly they've been put in the Trudeau government's crosshairs, and it's completely ineffective. And so we know that just like the past firearms legislation that was advanced by the Liberals, we've committed that we'll repeal that, and certainly this order in council is something that I'm firmly opposed to and would move to repeal. We're not sure what the length of an amnesty would look like at this point. They've talked about it being 2 years. That's going to have to go through the House, and we know that the government is going to be supported. The Liberals will be supported by the NDP and the separatist bloc Québécois, and so we're going to hope that and we're going to press that that period of time that they give, the amnesty period, if you will. If it's a 2-year period, well, we're going to have to make sure that in the next 2 years we elect a government that stands up for law-abiding firearms owners.
Yes, and ditto. When I'm the fourth person to speak on it, I couldn't have said any more. The only line I put on Facebook, I will say, is that, did criminals, people with possessing firearms illegally or wanted to commit gun violence, did they wake up any more worried on the morning after the Prime Minister's announcement about, oh, well, now there's a buyback program, I'm going to have to hand my guns in? There's going to be tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in government funding to buy back firearms that will never be involved in any illegal or mischievous or violent activity. Yet we don't have a single dollar more for CBSA, where we know gun smuggling is a major issue in police forces, particularly in urban areas, and the whole issue around domestic violence. That is something that I think those are the conversations where I think it's a root cause, and still we're not tackling the needed areas of that. So I hope that is alluded a little bit to that. Getting back to our questions, we got about 10 minutes left here, and there's 2 that I have in the queue. I believe I see Amy Kirkland with her hand up. So Amy, will unmute your microphone here. And if you can hear us, go ahead.
Thank you. So we're having a problem with the 75% wage subsidy all across the board, which includes every sector, including the ag sector. People aren't getting the responses back. Personally, I work for the Thousand Islands Gananoque Chamber, and we have not received anything back, as well as is there going to be a prolonged version to this? Because the agri-food and agriculture sector could really do with this right now up until, say, November, where they can hire and 75% of their costs be covered, as well as the HST. I think that was another concern that came to me from our Agri-Food members, that they're paying a huge amount in HST, but they're spending more than they're getting in. So I just wanted to know if there was something that you guys had planned for the agri-food sector in regards to 75% wage subsidies, as well as the HST issues.
Michael, did you want to tackle that? I believe that's a constituent of yours.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for the question, Amy. That's great. Yeah, so the emergency wage subsidy, some employers are reporting that they applied last week, and that the money has hit their bank accounts now. Now, I have heard that anecdotally. I haven't heard that from any of my constituents, though, and so I know that that people are waiting. The claim period that we're in right now, that folks are eligible to apply for, is March 15th to April 11th. Now, there's a second claim period, so it's been extended April 12th until May 9th, and that will go through to June 6th. So March 15th to June 6th, and if you applied today, that's retroactive until March 15th when that claim period started. So it can be tremendously helpful, the 75% wage subsidy, whether the employer can afford the payroll taxes and keep the employee at home, or whether they're bringing them back and paying the 25% remaining balance of their wages. And so I know that, and I just got a message from someone that they've, from one of my constituents, that they have received their wage subsidy. They got it 72 hours after they applied. And so so the money is, that money is coming out now. With respect to HST, we've made the proposal that the federal portion of remittances, the GST, for a period of at least 6 months, we've offered to the government a few times that instead of offering, like the emergency business account, which is $40,000, 10,000 of which is forgivable, that's still $30,000 in debt, and it's a lot of restrictions on what that money can be used for. So we're still calling on the government to refund GST remittances to business owners and just put cash back in their pockets. It's a direct subsidy. The government certainly knows how to collect it, so they can just refund it back through that same way. And it's not going to saddle agri-food producers, farms with and other businesses with more debt coming out of this, because we need tailwinds at this point. We don't need any more headwinds. And when we look at ways that we can really give a boost, there certainly are some criticisms that we could offer to the government about the way they're spending the money, how long it's taking to get out there, and the criteria that are being applied. But we're also proposing real solutions, and we think that this one is really effective. And so I think that putting cash into business operators' hands so that they can meet their obligations, meet their covenants to the bank, buy the product that they need, get their seed in the ground, get the feed on the farm, whatever it is. And so that's been our approach so far, and I hope that answers your question. And if not, just give me a call.
Sorry there, John or Jamie, did you have anything to add to that? Good, I think Michael covered it well. I want to get to a question. I believe he's also on the call here. Is Eric Pesor from the he's the Organic Transition Manager from the Canadian Organic Growers. I'm just going to unmute you, see if that's going to work. Eric, if you can unmute yourself, I think you might be there now.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to get to ask your question, and maybe if you can elaborate on this. The question you had was, why is ESDC, which is Employment and Social Development, Employment and Social Development, I believe, Canada, why are they using COVID-19 as a crisis as an excuse for delaying the distribution of funds when the economy needs these funds to be distributed? The applications were digital, and the remaining work to be done on them could easily be finished from home, yet they're sending emails that there's a delay because of COVID. Just wanted you to follow up on that, Eric, just to say, is it a specific program? Are you talking about the CERB or the, what type of program specifically?
Yeah, it's similar to that question, but I think it would be helpful to hold the government to account for and the Federal Civil Service, because on the one hand, we're hearing, get this money out, and it's very similar to what she has expressed, that some people aren't getting the money. Really, a lot of us have to go to work. As farmers, we're working, or we're working with farmers, and in this case, we should expect the same the federal government has put in digital applications so that things should be fairly easy. Most federal workers I know are working from home, but yet there are emails being sent out to grant applicants that say, due to COVID, we will be delayed in adjudicating your application, or something to that effect. And really in this timing and what everyone's going through, it's a rather ridiculous statement to be made. So, I mean, the more that you all could hold the government to account and say, get the director generals to push these things out further and faster, but for farmers and for those working with farmers, that would be very helpful, I think.
Noted and well said. I appreciate the clarification. I can just hop in on that I put a tweet out yesterday, very frustrated about Service Canada and the levels there, to your point, on some of these benefits and the backlogs. And I'll give you a personal context. I live in South Mountain. I'm living with my family right now. I'm back in my parents' basement in South Mountain, playing musical houses with my family. But I had a woman show up to our house yesterday, absolutely distraught, just from a couple kilometers down, knows my dad. She didn't realize I was here, but she had been contacting my office 4 or 5 times and had applied for EI sick benefits back on March the 8th. We're now 2 months later, and her case is not solved. She can't get somebody to call her back to see what's going on, to get a payment update. And it had been 2 months without money. They were out of money. And so they showed up with my front staff. I didn't mind that. That wasn't the point or the problem. The problem is that, to your point, Eric, very well said, that all these programs are here, but if they can't get approved and people that have glitches or need the help can't get an answer in a timely manner, we've got a problem here. And we have an excellent working relationship with Service Canada locally and a lot of federal departments, my constituency staff, but we're now 50 to 55 cases specifically on EI and the CERB that we know are outstanding, several of them over a month ago that they were started and initialized and haven't heard anything back. So I had the minister's staff reach out to me asking how they could help. And I said, you know, they need to take a look here to see about getting some percentage, anybody back into these offices, not necessarily opening to the public, but doing what we're doing is a phone and email access to get this backlog dealt with. It's wonderful to have all these programs and assistance, but if people can't get the money and they can't get a hold of somebody, whether to the point that Amy had earlier, if they're having problems with the emergency wage subsidy, I have constituents on the phone 3-4 hours with CRA. If you're 3-4 hours in the wait or calling your MP and not hearing back for 4.5 weeks, but to say it's been sent for processing, we've got a problem here. So I know many of my colleagues, we've discussed this at Ontario Caucus several times. There's got to be a plan to get back to some semblance of normalcy and some customer service levels on that. But thank you for raising that. I think we'll go here. John Lunn, I see John's hand is raised. So Adrian, if we can get him unmuted, we'll perhaps make him the last question before we wrap up. John. Are you there, John? I can see that you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Here we go. We got you now, John.
Okay, so I'm a beef farmer in Ontario. We were in a crisis back in last August when we lost one of our major packing plants. We've been asking for help since then. With COVID-19, obviously we're put on the back burner, but with the funding that has been handed out by this government, my question is, how are we going to raise our profile, or how are we going to get heard? The funding is very, very inadequate, and we're in a lot of trouble here in the East for processing cattle. It's not just Ontario, it's all of Eastern Canada now that's falling behind on cattle, and until we get another competitor in our beef industry, we're in a lot of trouble. But it's all of us. The farmers in the East here, I just don't know how we're going to get the government to recognize that agriculture now is the #1 economy driver in Ontario, and we need to be heard and we need to be acknowledged.
And Eric, if I can just tack on to that before we turn it over to John, there's just in the chat there, Kim Sitzma raised the issue of beef as well, and the risk management program, federal funding for that as well. If I could just tack that on when we're red circling the beef industry in John's next response.
Yeah, thanks for that, John and Kim. I'm just reading Kim's question on the chat here as well. Yeah, for certain, John, and it's interesting you bring that up. And the agriculture minister today at committee was asked by a Liberal MP, did she know about the need for some of these programs before COVID? We had put the warning on her desk. I gave her a letter, met with her on December 12th of the processing capacity issue in Ontario with the closing of Riding Regency. So she's known about this as a critical problem even before COVID-19. So you're exactly right. This is not a new problem for producers and ranchers, farmers. I know we call them ranchers in Alberta, but I've been told by Michael Chong that you don't call yourselves ranchers. You should. It's a cool name. But yes, this has been an ongoing issue. And you're right. It's highlighted by the fact that we have 2 or 3 major processors in the country. In my hometown of High River, I have Cargill Meats, which is about 36% of the entire processing capacity in the country. That was down for 14 days. That's 45 head of cattle every single day. Now we're somewhere close to 100,000 cattle backed up in the system, if not, maybe even more than that now. And as I said, this isn't a solution that's going to happen overnight. because we're barely back at 15% slaughter capacity or 50% in Canada right now, with JBS in Brooks, Alberta hanging on, Cargill and High River finally back up and running at some capacity, and Cargill and Guelph. But the funds that were announced for the set-aside program, as I said, for cattle and specifically, $50 million is nothing. Like, it's gone already. It's not going to be any assistance anymore. And as we go through into the fall, when the real peak is in the processing, and when we may be back to 85% at the best, we are going to have a significant issue in this country. So a couple of things. This is not a short-term solution, but we need to expand capacity within Canada. Perhaps allow more, get rid of those provincial boundaries, so provincially regulated processing plants can move their product outside of provincial boundaries would be one, as a short-term solution. But the other thing would be to expand and enhance what is called the Western Livestock Price Protection Insurance Program. Ontario has a different program, but we could make that program national. So this would be a quick private sector solution to this problem, would be an injection into cash. But the other problem with that is the premiums are quite high, $70 a head, where they're normally around that $10 or $15 a head. So we would need some government intervention there to bring down the premiums, spread the liability across the entire sector, across Canada. That could also be a solution. But right now, as you kind of alluded to, our problem isn't offering solutions and tangible ideas to address the problems that agriculture is facing. And I think my colleagues would agree with me here. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. Our problem is we have an agriculture minister who has zero clout or very little clout at the cabinet table. So when these programs are being announced, and as somebody previously said, the wage subsidy, whether it's the emergency business account or the wage subsidy, agriculture doesn't qualify or isn't eligible for many of these programs. That's why we're asking for a program designed specifically for agriculture, but it hasn't happened. And they just don't see it as a top priority. And it boggles my mind, because when we come out of this, we're going to be in a very deep financial hole. There are only a handful of industries that will have the wherewithal to help get us out of this. And one of those industries is agriculture. People are still going to need to buy food. The world is going to be in a global food shortage, and Canada will be poised to help address that. So why are we not ensuring that agriculture is clicking on all cylinders coming through this? And that is what needs to happen. That is the only way we're going to change that, is to get Canadians vocal and understanding and appreciating where their food comes from.
Great, thanks, John. With it being a few minutes after 9 o'clock, maybe what we'll do is a bit of a wrap up. If anybody has any closing comments, John, we'll start with you, and thanking you for joining us. You're an encyclopedia. There's no shortage of issues in agriculture, but we appreciate you joining us tonight. And myself and Michael and Jamie not being on the Ag Committee, but talking with you and Leanne quite a bit on ag issues. It's great to have you here to get some feedback from us, and then for you to kind of give an update of what you're working on. Any closing comments you've got?
No, I've had my rant for the night, and I just thank you very much for allowing me to be here and inviting me. And I would just, I see Keith on here, and Keith Curry has been a great resource for us as well. And please, to any of you on this call, don't hesitate to reach out, not only to your MP, but certainly to Leanne or myself. Your insight and your feedback is absolutely critical as we continue to push this. But my ask of you would be to, and I know you're busy, you're seeding, you're busy with your own work, but whatever opportunity you have to champion your cause within your communities, please do so. We need Canadians to be talking about the critical situation in agriculture and the vital role that you play in our economy. As I said, we will be there to augment your voice, but please, we're asking you to also participate and be proactive. But again, thanks so much for everything you're doing. We're asking Canadians to stay home and stay safe, but every day you're going out there and working hard to put food on our table and groceries on our shelves. So much appreciated, and thanks for everything you're doing.
Thanks for joining us, John. We'll go to Michael.
Well, thanks, John, for being here tonight, and just want to recognize your colleague Eric, MPP Jim McDonnell, who's on the call as well. And speaking of MPPs, my provincial counterpart, MPP Steve Clark, is on his way back from Queen's Park right now. And for those of you in my community, Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, MPP Clark will be joined by his colleague from the cabinet table, Agriculture Minister Ernie Hardman, on Thursday. And so if you wanted to, if you're in Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes, and you'd like to be on that call, send an email to Steve's office. It's info@steveclarkmpp.com. And I know most of you from our community you probably have Steve's number committed to memory, but get in touch if you'd like to join that call. And thank you very much for the insights this evening. Please keep reaching out to my office with any updates on what's going well and what's not going well. Certainly we'll filter it back to John and to Leanne and our team on the Ag Committee. But thank you very much, everyone, and have a great night. Stay safe.
Thanks, Michael. Jamie.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to all my colleagues and every single one of you that have come on the call to talk about the issues that are affecting you. I agree with everything that's been said. It's been a tough few years, especially 2019. And even before the crisis hit, there were a number of sectors that were hurting, and this just amplified that. So our job is to take those concerns back and also fight for you. But as John said, I think there are opportunities at the end of this. There are markets where we as a country, if we're focused and the government is able to help, can help increase access so you can get the products that you make or harvest out the door and into additional markets. But as we talk about the potential for farms closing, we need to get the younger generation in. And I think that goes back to how government operates. If, like any business, you need an environment that allows private sector growth to succeed. And that means, keeping taxes low, rules, regulations, red tape at a reasonable level, and that you're doing what you know best, which is working your farm, your operation, and not filling out endless amounts of government forms. So, going forward, I think it's important that the politicians, that the government all have a focused approach, that we are working so that you, as farmers, as business owners, are able to make a profit and then make that even more attractive to future generations. Because if we can't feed ourselves as a country, we've got huge problems. And as a selfless promotion, if I could, Eric, we have a podcast every week. And this podcast this week talked about agriculture, and John Barlow was the guest. That's probably why he has no voice left. He spoke with me for too long. But if you want to check it out, it's on my Facebook page, it's on John's Facebook page, and we really go into depth on quite a few of the issues facing Canadian agriculture. So I invite you to check that out. Thanks again, everyone. I know you're busy. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. And I will just wrap up 2 quick points. Number one is Danny had a question specifically about the equine industry and businesses along there. One of my closing comments tonight was, we do realize there are some businesses that are still falling, too many businesses are falling through the cracks of the business account, the wage subsidy. I would encourage you, if you are an agriculture business, to reach out to your local CFDC, your Community Future Development Corporation. They have received some funding, or in the process of, and we're actually looking to have a seminar hopefully later this week. They have some funds that hopefully will be addressing some of the gaps and have some flexibility and eligibility. So if you're having issues with the payroll, remittances amounts, and some of the eligibility for those programs, I would encourage you to reach out to your CFDC. In my riding, please connect with Adrian in my office or my office, and we can certainly get you on the waiting list for whenever a webinar is developed with more information on that. And last but not least, we're going to be happy to do another agricultural one with Jim McDonnell locally in a couple of weeks. And I know there was a couple of questions that came in tonight asking for more information on the proposed Prescott Russell Abattoir. We're still trying to get some information, but I'm hoping to have a special guest come in to brief our area on what that potential is and what the timelines and details are. So with that being 10 after 9, thank you very much to everybody. We had at one point, I think, over 75, 85 people from across Eastern Ontario, which is much appreciated. Take care, stay well, everybody, and most importantly, keep in touch with us. Thanks for joining us and have a great night, everybody. And thanks again, John and Leanne.